Hello, and welcome to another episode of Nature Nation. My name's Matt. Fall is my favorite time of year. The temperatures start dropping, you get that crisp, clean feeling in the air. Turkey is just around the corner with Thanksgiving, and the leaves start changing. The question is, why do they change? Why do they fall off? And why do some trees have colors, others don't? We're going to answer those questions in this coming episode. So stick around. We don't want you to leave. As I said, we're talking about fall and the change of leaves. Now, the reason why leaves change, especially on these, is because this is what's called a deciduous tree. Now, there are two types of trees out there. There's deciduous, like this, or broadleaf, and there's conifers, like pines. Now, I talked about those in my first video, so if you wanted to get more information on that, go check out my first video. Well, we're talking about the change of leaves and why that happens. Well, because these are deciduous and because they're broadleaf, if snow were to fall with all the leaves on there, the weight would be so much it would break all the branches off because there's so much surface area on this tree. Now that's why it loses its leaves. Now, the coloration, believe it or not, the color is already there in the summer. When you see the leaves. Even in the spring, when they first come out, the color's already there. You can't see it because the leaves are green. But the color also depends on the tree and depends on how much water they got the year before. Now, here in Arizona, we've been in a pretty bad drought. They had very little rain last year. And so these trees are in what's called survival mode. And what that means is that there wasn't enough water the year before for them to store up all that water, that the leaves are changing a rather dull color. Some of them are just yellow no matter what. But if you noticed, there are some places, and there's been drought all over the country, so there's some places where you're not as bright reds or orange as you normally see them. That again is because of survival mode. Now, we did have a lot of rain this year, so next year we should have a lot brighter colors. Now, why do they change? Well, what's happening is the tree is actually taking all of the nutrients, the green, the chlorophyll, and pulling it into the roots. Well, what that's doing is it stores it there during the winter. The tree isn't actually dead, it hibernates. Think of it kind of like a bear. Even though a bear doesn't truly hibernate, trees do. They pull all of their nutrients down into their roots and they store them there until it starts to warm up. Now, when do these change? We'll talk about that next. The leaves begin to change when the sun starts dropping. Now, around the middle of June, which would be about June 20th, June 21st, depending on the calendar, is the summer solstice, or the point where the sun is at its highest point. From there, it starts dropping. You'll notice that it starts getting darker a little earlier and earlier every day from there. You won't notice it probably until August or September when it really starts getting dark, and it starts getting dark around 6:30, 7 o'clock instead of 9. The trees sense this too. And once they sense that the sun isn't as high as it was, they start pulling all of the nutrients into their roots. It's kind of like a timer, them saying, fall is almost here, prepare for winter. Now, what happens when they come off? Obviously, when the leaves come off, they dry up, and then you crunch through them. You've heard that typical sound. Yeah, you know that sound of walking through leaves in the fall. Now, when they get all like that, they actually begin to break down and they actually return to the soil and actually help fertilize the soil. So that's why a lot of times when people mow some of their last few times, they won't actually pick it up, but they'll do something called mulching. What that does is it turns it into tiny, tiny little pieces that gets into the ground and begins to fertilize it for the coming spring. Fall is also the time where some of these trees actually begin to disperse their seeds. Now this one is already creating a seed pod here. These will actually, once all the leaves are gone, this will actually open up, kind of like this one, and it will have its seeds with very fine hairs on them. And will actually allow them to just float away. Now not all trees will do this in the fall. Maples, probably some of the most common trees and the most beautiful, will actually do them in the spring. And they do them with what we call whirligigs. You've seen it, or helicopters. They have that little seed, that long blade on them. And then they spin around until they hit the ground. That is how maples do it. Now maples are, like I said, probably the most beautiful. They're the ones that have the reds and the oranges. Now, that color is already there, as I've said before. It exists in that leaf during the whole time that tree is creating nutrients. The whole reason for the leaves is so the tree can create nutrients and grow. In fact, there's a little experiment I want you to try, and it doesn't harm the tree at all. During the winter, what I want you to do is I want you to find a tree, like maybe a maple or a sycamore, maybe even a birch, something like that, that has a little tip at the end of the branch. And I want you to take a black magic marker, and I want you to make a little line right underneath the bottom of that little tip. And then, next fall, I want you to measure how far it is from that tip to that black line. And that will tell you how much that tree has grown over the year. So that is it for this episode of Nature Nation. I hope you learned something. Hope you learned something about how the leaves change and why they change. How some leaves use the time in the fall to disperse their seeds, and some do it in the spring. And also why some of those colors change and that they're already there. And don't forget that little experiment I told you about with that magic marker. Now, until next time, keep adventuring.